Hey y'all, as you most undoubtedly know, the scrolling Starfield has been a staple of gaming for a long time now. From the super basic sets of static stars that just kind of slowly scroll across to the really complex, multi-layered, interactable fields, and pretty much everything in between. In addition to the ton of different ways that they have appeared on the screen, there's been a ton of different techniques to actually achieve this effect along the way. Today, we're going to dive into one of them, and by the time we're done with this video, you're going to know how to make an awesome Starfield just like this one using Unity's visual effects graph. So let's dive into it. I should say the inspiration for this particular video was Guido Hinkle's, and I hope that's how you pronounce his names, a really awesome tutorial that he made like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago now, using the particle system and some image flipping techniques to make his Starfield. While it is a truly amazing setup that he's got there, it did have some limitations in its setup, and the way it was done would also result in repeating patterns of stars over time for anybody who was paying too close of enough attention. And so personally, I really just wanted to add some more variability into that system and some additional options to use, and also wanted to shift it over to the VFX system so that I could shift that workload over to the GPO. If you're not familiar with it, there are several key differences between Unity's standard particle system and the visual effect graph. The biggest one is, of course, what I'd already mentioned about the particle system runs on the CPU, and the visual effects graph runs on the GPU. One of the results of this is, of course, that you can have significantly more particles running at once in VFX. Unfortunately, there are, of course, always some downsides to everything. VFX does have some limitations in that it's a lot harder to integrate it in with some of the things that are going on in your scene. It's more difficult to plug into scripts, and it doesn't interact with the physics systems. However, in our scenario here, where we're looking at having some type of background Starfield animation, those are really not a concern. In fact, we're not even going to have to write a single line of code in order to do this. All right, so let's jump into it. First thing, I am using Unity 2023. However, this should work just fine with older versions of Unity. The main thing that matters is that you have the universal render pipeline or the high definition render pipeline set up, and you have installed the visual effects graph package, because that is the main thing that we are going to be using. To get us started, I made a very simple system here with just a canvas, some text, and a couple of buttons, just so we've got something to look at as we're setting things up. And then I also set up the camera to be with a solid color, again, just to make sure that it's easy for things to stand out as we go about actually building this. So the first thing we're going to do to get started here is we are going to create a visual effect graph. So if I choose in here, visual effect graph, and we're going to call this stars. This is just a template or prefab, depending on the terminology you want to use, that lets us define the rules for my visual effect. And then we're going to go ahead and create a game object, a visual effect game object, to put this new effect on. So I'm going to call it star layer, and we'll put our stars visual effect in there. And now it's actually rendering, so we can't really see it particularly close at the moment, but let's zoom in. And there you are, can see that it's using kind of a default little particle display that Unity has. But we're going to go ahead and edit that now to be our settings. I'm going to tweak my screen up a little bit here just to make it a little bit easier to edit from. Now we have our visual effects graph, and we're going to go ahead and start getting it set up the way that we want it. Now, the first thing that we want to do is actually have our stars show up at the top of the screen and slowly work their way down. So what we're going to do is, let's get this set up a little bit. First off, we're going to choose what rate that we want these stars to be able to come in. And since we want this to be able to be layered, we're going to go ahead and create a variable that we can expose in the inspector for how many stars get spawned. Let's up our spawn rate. And just for default, we're going to set that to, say, 5 or whatever. And tie that in to now our spawning system, so it'll constantly be churning out 5 each second. All right, so now that we have our spawn rate set, the next thing we want to do is make sure that they're generating up at the top of the screen. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to set them to spawn across a line, Now what this does is with it set at random, it's going to randomly pick a spot on the line to be where their initial position is set up. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set our line so that's just kind of a line running across the top of the screen with, based on how our camera is currently set up, since we're making it kind of a static menu. And so now you can see they're getting spawned on this line. Of course, they're actually going up. So we're going to remove some of these default values that the system had put in there for that. And then now we'll add in a force that'll cause those particles to actually move down the screen. So we'll just add in a force. And we're going to have that relative, the force is relative to that particular particle. And it's just going to move slowly down the screen. And so now you can see here that as these particles get generated, they just kind of slowly move down the screen. The other thing we want to do is we want to increase the number that can be there. Right now it's only going to allow 32. Since we're going to have a lot of stars, we're just going to pump that up to 50,000. So we never have to worry about how many stars are getting generated. The last thing to make sure that we kind of have our basic setup in place is we do want to set a lifetime on these guys so that they stay visible until they make it to at least the bottom of the screen. So we're just going to set it to 250. That way we know for a fact that it's going to reach down there. All right, so let's take a quick look at what we have done so far. If we enter play mode here, we can see our basic menu that we set up a second ago. And any second now, we can see that some of these stars, as we've created, start dropping into the screen and flowing on down. So that's nice and all, but let's go ahead and make them actually look a little bit more like stars. So two things that we want to do here. First off, we need to get rid of these kind of default settings that were in there for that kind of sort of smoke effect that they were in. We're going to pick what particle we want it to look like. Now, I'm just going to use the built-in Unity particle, but of course you could pick whatever you want. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to set a size on these particles. We're going to create a variable on this so that we can expose it in the inspector. So we'll do our star size. And we will default that to 0.5 and apply that to our thing. And so now with just that relatively simple change, we can see that the stars are already looking considerably better than they were. Now that we have that in place, let's add two more variables that we're going to need as we start to add additional layers into our Starfield. The first of which is going to be one to control the speed. So we will add a float for our star speed. And we'll just default that to the 0.5. And then we'll go ahead and drag that on. And then we will add another one, this one an integer for the depth field. And really this is for when we start adding in the additional layers so that we can make sure that they end up getting sorted in the way that we actually want it to. So let's zoom in here for a second and get these set up. So first off, for our depth, really all we're going to need to do is control where the Z position is for that line, which is our spawning line. So we'll go ahead and connect that to both of our Z's here. And then for the speed, the easiest thing to do would actually be to just connect this speed to the Y value on our force. But if you remember right, since everything's moving down, our speed is at negative values. To me personally, it just makes more sense that when I'm entering the speed, I want to enter a positive value. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a little multiply node here to just multiply the value by -1 for whatever comes in for that speed. So you can do that. And then that is what actually gets applied to my speed. And so now, of course, with what we've done here and the default values that we set, it's really not going to change anything to our setup yet. But you can see with the updates that we made to the look and feel of the stars, they are looking a whole lot better. But let's go ahead and add in some additional layers so we can start to get that depth. So I'm going to go ahead and create my layers here real fast. So first, I'm going to go ahead and make some updates to our base layer to get that set up the way that I want it. And we'll put that at 0 depth, and then we'll go ahead and create the additional layers, and we'll just kind of tweak these values a little bit. So basically we'll be spawning a little bit more with each row, but making them a little bit smaller and a little bit slower so that they're now that we've got that set, we can pop over here to look at our stars, and you can see that we've got that nice Starfield view now. We've got a bit of a depth of field to it with the smaller stars moving slower in the background and really starting to fill everything out nicely. The other thing I want to point out while we're here is we are still getting exceptionally high frame rates. Since all of this work is actually being done by the GPU. One thing I do want to adjust here, though, is you can note that everything that's in the same tier lengths, I can tell they're all moving at exactly the same speed, which is obviously not exactly what we want. So let's go back into our VFX here, and we're going to apply a little bit of random factor to the speed as well as to the size. This way we can kind of have a little bit of variability even within each of our own areas here. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll add a multiply node. We will add a random number node. And I don't want it to change a whole lot because obviously we've got the value set that's for this. So we'll just adjust things by about, give it like a 40% range that it can have for how those values are going to get generated. And so now, I'm still using the rules that are set in my game object, but I have a little bit of variability there. And we're going to do the same thing with speed. We'll go ahead and generate a new random number here, and we'll do the same thing. We'll do it, about 40% window there where it can be. Of course, I already have a multiply node on my star speed, so I can just add that into the mix. And so now when those stars get generated, they are going to have a little bit of flexibility to their speed. So we can take a look at that here. And so, yeah, I can see here now, even stars that are on the same tier are having slightly different speeds. And there are also a little bit of variability to the sizes, even for stars that are on the same layer. So it just gives a little bit more realistic feel to that. Now, speaking to that, let's do two other things that are kind of important around color. So one of the things we want to do is we want to make the stars that are further away have that kind of reddish tinge to them. If you're familiar with the wonderful science of redshift, that's why we want to do that. And then the other thing that I want to do is not all stars are white. So let's put in some color on our foreground stars as well. Let's go ahead and set the red shift on here first. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down here to our output section. What we're going to do is we're going to add a block to set the color based on the speed of that particular particle. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and say, yep, find on color on alpha. The speed ranges from 0 to 1. Basically, what we want to do is, in our case here, we're actually going to have the alpha always be full. But on the colors, we want to kind of pop this over and put some red in it. So, up to about 15%, we'll go ahead and just do a kind of a nice, more or less pure red. And then, just a little bit further out, because I want to make sure that more of it has some red. So we'll put another point out here, maybe around the 45% range or so. We'll put this at another kind of reddish color. If I could type. There we are. And so now a lot of our stars have that red shift on them. The other thing that I want to do is add that, like I said, that little bit of randomity to the core color itself. So we're going to add a color random on here. And what we're going to actually do is we're going to multiply by the color random, because what we want to do is make sure that we're still accounting for that red. So we want to add this color in, or multiply in this color to our red. So I'm going to go with some blues and yellows as being the range. Obviously, you can play with this to get the color sets that you want. I'm going to do just a basic kind of light blue there and a light yellow. Boom. And so now we can take a look at our updated map. And so, yeah, there we are. That's looking pretty good. All the stars that are further away and further back are very red. The ones that are closer to the front have got varying shades of yellows and blues. So it's looking pretty perfect. So this is great, but of course, the big problem is, depending on your use case, chances are you actually want there to be a lot of stars on the screen as soon as you pop in. And, you know, right now you have to wait an awful long time for them to start to fill in. So let's fix that problem. Okay, so now we want to go ahead and have a set of stars spawned in on the screen as soon as we pop in. Now, the nice thing is you can go ahead and the system does let you create a new spawner. So we're going to create a spawner. We are going to give it as an event to spawn just a single burst. Now, this burst of stars, I think it makes sense to have it be relevant or related to the spawn rate that we already set. So what we're going to do is we'll just go ahead and create a multiply node. And we will take the value that we're set for spawn rate for that level, multiply that by 100, and that will be the number of stars that get created for this new level. Now, unfortunately, when you connect this in, you could pop it in there. It's going to do it with our line spawner that we already have, and you notice there, boom, all of them got generated immediately on a single line, which is definitely not what we want. And unfortunately, there's not a way to change out just this block and keep everything else the same. So what we're going to have to do is create a whole new stack of our setup here. So what I'm going to do is we'll just select this whole system. We'll copy it, we'll paste it. I didn't mean to copy the spawner again, but that's all right. So we'll take all of this. This is our new box. We will connect it to the spawner, our bulk spawner. Then we are going to get rid of this line position to create it. And what we're going to do is create it inside of a box instead. So we'll set our position to spawn somewhere inside the surface of a box. And the same thing as we did before, we're just going to make sure that that box is centered around our camera. So 40 and 25, we'll put it on our camera this time. But we do want to make sure that these particles are following the same rules as the particles that we set up over here. So let's go ahead and make sure that we connect our velocity and our size rules, to be the same. So now when I hit play, I should have a set of stars there immediately, which I do, and they begin to fall, and then the new ones start getting spawned in from there. So this is great and good. Looks pretty good. You know, a lot of folks could stop right here. I think you might want to make the background color a little bit darker to make this kind of pop a little bit better. But in the example that we looked at, they had kind of nebula gases swirling around, and everything had been based on doing some image flipping. But we're going to go ahead and use the VFX system to create our own nebula. While we switch over to getting that set up, now would be a great time to go do that whole subscribe and like the video thing. But let's go ahead and start setting up our new VFX graph. All right, since we've done this once before, we're going to go ahead and do this a little bit faster this time. Let's go ahead and create our new VFX graph. We're going to call this our haze. If we open this guy up, what we're going to do first is go ahead and create all the variables that we're going to need this time, so that we can go ahead and get that out of the way. So I'm going to do that real quick. All right, now that we've got those variables set, let's go ahead and get them plugged in here. So first off, our haze amount, we're still going to have a constant spawn rate, but we'll just base it based on that. We are going to increase our capacity to 10,000 particles. And here we don't want these random velocity setups. We are going to want a random lifetime though from, let's say, 100 to 500, because we want these particles to last a long time. As far as the speed though is concerned, we're going to add a random velocity on this. So set random velocity, and we want that to be, you know, per component. So each particle is going to get its own random set. So we'll bring in our variables here for random speeds. We'll tie those guys in. And we'll tie them in there. Perfect. Same thing. We're going to want a random size. Which, again, we have variables for. And then lastly, on our setup, we want to make sure that they all form initially somewhere on the screen. So let's set our position inside of a box. Much like we did previously, we're just going to make sure that it's showing up somewhere on a box inside the camera side of things. So that by itself should cause a lot of the particles to show up. So having done that, let's be able to set it up so that we can take a quick look at it. Let us add our game object for it. And this is going to be our haze. And we need to connect our haze here in the inspector. Boom. And so now it's all generating, but of course it's not looking quite right because we never actually changed the particle setup. So let's get our particle set up the way that we want that done. So the first thing is, of course, we want to actually pick the particle object. Again, I'm just going to use the default particle. We're going to get rid of this set life over size and set color over life. And so now you can see it's generating all kinds of craziness there. But let's go ahead, and what we're going to do first is we want to put a random gradient on it. And this is so that we can have it, some of them more opaque than others. So boom, set color random from gradient. This time we're only going to be worrying about the alpha is what we want to change, and we're going to change it based on that gradient variable that we created earlier. So that will make some of them see they're a lot more see-through. And then lastly, we need to put some color on it. Oops. So we're going to set a color random per component. So set color random per component. And we can use the two colors that we created for our variables for what we want things to be between. The last thing that we want to touch on here is, just like we did with the stars, we want to put a kill box on there so that anything that's really kind of drifted off the screen, we can make sure, you know, we're not wasting any compute power. Even though it is on the GPU, there's no reason to waste that power. So let's put a kill box on here. And same thing, you know, basically we want to since we've got this set up to drift off the screen, we want to make sure that we're just killing any particles that drift off the bottom side of the screen. And with it set up this way, we can now, we'll go ahead and save that. In our inspector view, on our haze, we can set all the values that we want. I'm going to go ahead and leave these with the defaults that we set up originally. And so now if we hit a play on this, we can see that it fills in quite nicely with a little bit of randomness that we've got in the flows there. We'll kind of get some nice little swirly effects in there, but we do have the same problem that we had earlier where it doesn't spawn in everything right from the beginning and you've got to wait a second to actually see it pop in there. So let's fix that. The good news is with our haze, it's actually going to be a much easier change to make because we're already spawning inside of the entire box. So we actually can just add a new spawn node here. And we're going to set it to have a single burst of the spawn. And for our count, same thing. Let's go ahead and multiply from our base spawn rate. This one I don't think we need to do 100 times because we're already spawning in a lot more with this guy. So we'll go ahead and link that in, multiply it by 10, create that into our count. And then since we're already set up for a box, I can go ahead and just link this straight in there. So now if I hit play, we'll immediately have our nebula in place. The stars form quickly, and then everything is able to flow from there. And so there you have it, a GPU enabled and super customizable animated Starfield that you can use for your menu screens or, actually running behind your game if you've got some type of scroller here. And obviously you can tweak all the values to get everything, the colors that you want and how you'd like it set up and which flows you want to go. So if you found this useful, I hope that you will choose to give us a thumbs up here, a like and subscribe. And please let me know in the comments what you're going to use this for. Thanks and have a great day.